Tailwind CSS is an awesome utility-first CSS framework that helps you compose beautiful components quickly and efficiently. It's an awesome way to create your own component library within your own application that suits just your project. Today, I'm going to build on all of that and show you some really cool techniques that I've learned over the time using this in various projects and building upon things like ShadCN UI, which is really cool and I recommend checking it out. But I'm going to show you some really cool ways we can use theming, so adding our own colors in, and a way that this ties in with dark mode really nicely to make it really easy so you don't have to use that dark modifier that you may have been using. And I'm also going to show you how you can use something called class-variance-authority to build different variants of components, which is really good for things like buttons where you need sort of a primary button, a destructive button, and things like that. As well as this, I'm going to show you some helper functions that you may have seen in various libraries such as CN, and I'm just going to walk through that and explain why we're actually using that and some really cool ways to utilize it. And I'm also just going to show you some sort of best practices and a way that I like to use Tailwind. So let's jump into it. Now, the first thing we're going to tackle is the theming, as I mentioned there. So what I've got over here on the left is I've got a Next.js application, which I've just padded out with Tailwind. So I'm going to assume you have Tailwind installed for this already. As I said, we're going through some sort of advanced techniques here. But in this, we've just got a page. And as you can see, it's pretty poor styling at the moment. But that's just so you can see everything clearly. And it's just got some basic styles with a border black, blue background. And I've also got a button here, which is essentially what would be your component itself. And this is going to be the example I'm going to be using. And in this, it's just got that red text or white text and red background. And we're just using it up here to say subscribe. So as I said, the first thing we're tackling is that theming. What we're going to do is we're going to go over to our globals.css. What theming is, as I mentioned, is adding in your own colors. So you may be given some brand guidelines or something, and you want to add this in so that Tailwind, you can use all of these colors in there without having to find the Tailwind color that matches it. And it's a really cool way I recommend using these, as I said, because it helps with the dark mode that I'll show you later. But the first thing you're going to want to do is do an @layer base. And then within this, you're going to want to put the root selector like so. And then you're going to want to define a few variables. What we're going to start with is primary. And this is going to be for buttons and sort of your call to action. So your call to action is going to have this primary color. It's going to be sort of a bold color usually. And it's the one that sticks out. And usually it's the brand color. What we're going to do to style this is we're going to need to use something called HSL color schema. You can use hex, but the reason we're going to use HSL is so that you can use the opacity modifier. If you don't know your HSL color, you can come in here, as I've done before, and type in a hex code, and it will give it to you there. So what you do in here is you'd come in here and do 203, 100%, and 50%. We're not going to use the HSL brackets in here because, as I said, Tailwind will use that later, and it will be able to apply that opacity modifier. The opacity modifier is just so we can do background bg-primary, and then you could put /80, and that would make it 80% opacity on that color. So what we're going to do now is you're going to want to define a color called primary foreground. Now, if you've never used these sort of foreground color naming scheme, it's really useful because essentially what this is saying any color that works on top of primary. So you'd give something a background of primary, and you know that primary foreground is going to be a text color that sticks out for that. So for that, all I'm going to use here is I'm going to put, I believe, black. So that's going to be 0, 0%, and 0%. So that's black. Now, to use these within Tailwind, what we're going to want to do is add these to our config by extending the theme. So you're going to want to come in here and you'll see you have a theme here. And you're going to want to put an extend object in there if you don't have one already. And then just another one called colors. In here, we're going to simply define our color name. So that was going to be primary. And if you have a foreground color, you're going to want to create an object. If it's just a single color, just create a string. But as I said, because we have a foreground color, what we're going to do is we're going to add a default here. So this is just going to be the one it uses when you do something primary. So bg-primary or text-primary. And in here, we're going to put a string. That's going to be HSL. That's going to be var and then --primary like so. So it's saying use that HSL color scheme on our variable primary. And it's going to go get that from the globals.css that we defined earlier. So if I come into here now, we can add our foreground color onto here. So this means we can do bg-primary-foreground, or as you'll more commonly use is text-primary-foreground. So again, this is just going to be HSL brackets var brackets --primary-foreground like so. So to get started using these, it's really simple. All you need to do is come into here. And let's say for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change, let's say, just actually the color of the div on the background. So if I change this to background, and now I can use that primary there. And as you'll see, I'm using the Tailwind CSS IntelliSense plugin. So it's already recognized and picked that up from my config and it's ready to use. I highly recommend using this VS Code plugin. I'll leave a link in the description below if you're not already using that. So what we'll do is we'll put background primary on that. And what you'll see is that will take in the primary var there and it will apply that background to this here. There we go. It's applied that color there. As I said, that's my primary color. It's this sort of blue shade here. And now it's applied that, as I said, we're going to need a text that sticks out. So we go back to our page.tsx. What you'll see is at the moment, I've got nothing on this. So we just define this as text-primary-foreground. Now, I don't think this is going to change much because that was already black. But essentially now, if we went and changed the background color to something else, we would just be able to change the text primary color to, again, something that would stand out on top of that. And this would all change nicely for us, which is a really big plus of using theming like this, is you only have to change something once when you want to change all of the colors, because you've used it throughout your application. You've just used background primary, so it will change it everywhere. And as I said, it's really useful for that foreground, for sticking out that text color with accessibility and everything like that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go add some more colors into my CSS. I'm also going to add a border radius in there, which is really useful if you just want to modify that in Tailwind. You don't have to do that, but I'm going to go add these now and I'll talk you through them. So what I've done here in my CSS is I've added a color called background. Now this is going to be for the application, so it's just the background of the application here. This is going to be white in my case. And then we've got foreground, which again, as I've explained up here, this is going to be a color that sticks out on top of this background here, so we know what color we can always use to stand out on top of our background. Then I've got border, and that's just going to be for these borders here, and that's just so I can use them across the application. And again, if I want to change them later, I don't have to go and find all of the Tailwind classes using it. I just change it in here. I've got destructive, which is going to be a nice red to stick out here for a destructive button in our case. And again, foreground, same principle, the text will stand out. Then I've also got ring here. Now what this is useful for is if you want to modify sort of this focus ring that you'll be using here. And I've also got radius here, which is useful if you want to change sort of the Tailwind's default rounded-SM. I'll show you how we've done that in the config now. So if I go over to the config, what you'll see is I've added all of those colors. So for the ones that don't have a foreground, I've simply just added the color as a string, and background and foreground are separate in this case. So again, they are strings. And for border radius, what you'll see here is I've added that outside of the colors object, and we've extended that to use for the large, we're using the variable of our radius. So that's going to be 1 rem. And then the rest of it, we're going to add 4 pixels if we want to go extra large. And then we're going to add a medium -2 pixels. And then small is going to be that -4 pixels. So that's just so we can go ahead and modify the rounding if you need it. As I said, you may not necessarily need this. It depends on what you're going for within your project. So let's use some of these. So if I go into here, what we'll see is we have border black, but I'm going to change this to border-border because that's going to be my border color across my application. I'm going to want to come here and change the background on main to background. And it's also useful up here to put your text-foreground, just so anything under it that you haven't specifically given a color to will take on that foreground color. Now in our button here, we're going to change this to background-destructive. Like so, and spell that correctly. There we go. And we're going to change this text white to text-destructive foreground, like so. And again, that is going to change to white. But as I said, it is useful if you wanted to change that later on down the line. So that is everything we've got for theming. Now what I want to show you is a really useful way we can use this for dark mode. The way I'm going to be showing you is if you have dark mode using class. So that would be coming into your Tailwind config here, setting dark mode to class, like so. But I'm also going to show you how you could do this if you just want to go off of the media query and you don't have an option for the user to select. As I said, this is an advanced Tailwind technique, so I'll leave some links in the description below on how you can handle dark mode and switching between them if you want to check them out. But now that we've got that dark mode class, what we can do is go into our global CSS. And within our layer base here, what we're going to do is we're going to add all of these colors again, but we're going to add them under the dark selector instead. So if we copy and paste these here, and we change this to dark, Now you're going to want to go in here and change all of these colors for what they would be in your dark theme. So I've got a list of colors here. All I'm going to do is simply change the background color in this list, I believe. And we'll go ahead and save that. Now, all you need to do to use dark mode, as I said, is it will be apply that class on the HTML element, however you're doing that. That may be with a button that applies it or various theme switches that you may use. For me, I'm just going to go ahead and sort of fake that by putting a dark class on the main that we have here. And as you'll see, that background color will change for us because it's now using the colors and the variables from this .dark selector because that's on the HTML element. So as I said before, when you're using root, this is everything for light mode. And now we've got that .dark and that .dark class within our Tailwind. It's going to use these colors instead. As I said, this is a really nice way to switch between dark mode. It stops you having to do that sort of dark selector like so. Really quickly, if you just want to go off of the media query, all you'd have to do is take out that .dark and essentially put all of the root things down here instead. So if I change this all to down here and save that, you'll see that nothing changes, and that's because I actually have prefers color scheme dark. So this is in dark mode for me because it's going off what I've set as my preference on my computer. I'm going to put this back to the class that we had there, but I'll leave a link in the description below for a blog post that will contain that. Next, what we're going to look at is how you can use a couple of helper functions to help you write your Tailwind, and a really good way essentially to make sure that your components are really nice and reusable, and also sort of a nice way to style them or do one-off styles. So let's jump into that. For these helper functions, we're going to have to install 2 packages. That's going to be whatever package manager you're using. I'm using PNPM. That's going to be CLSX and Tailwind-merge. Now, once you've installed them, you're going to want to put a function somewhere. I'm going to put it in a folder called libs, which you'll often see, or just lib, apologies, and then create a file, and I'm just going to call this utils.ts. The first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to create an export function, and that's going to be called cn. And as I said, you may have seen this in libraries such as shadcn. What we're going to do now is that's going to be ... input, so we're going to use the expander there. And then this is going to take the props of class value, and that's going to come from CLSX that we just installed. So I'm just going to let that import it there. And then in this function, it's going to be a really simple function where we just return Tailwind merge from Tailwind merge there, imported. And then within that, we do CLSX, and then we do inputs, and then we close that off. So that's the function, but I do want to explain why we're using these things. As I said, you may have seen these used elsewhere, but never really dug into why we're utilizing them. If we jump into our page.tsx, the first example I'm going to go through is why we're using the Tailwind merge part of it. If I change this class name down here to use that cn function, so all that is just wrap the string in cn, like so. And then we're going to import that from the right place. What you'll see is we actually use the prop class name here. So if we wanted to pass through some class names to the button so that we could do one-off styling, you could just do it without the cn by passing in the class name. But I'll show you where this becomes a problem if I just quickly remove the cn that we've just added, like so, and then I just do add class name, for example, put space there. This becomes a problem where, let's say, if I go up to my button now and I change the class name to background yellow -600, so it should come out like a nice yellow there. How do we know what color we actually wanted on that? Because did we want this background destructive here, or did we want the background yellow? If I go and inspect the HTML here, what you'll see is it actually has both of them on it. So it has that background destructive, text destructive foreground, but it also has background yellow. So this could cause some styling conflicts. So what we're going to show you is how Tailwind merge helps you with this. So as I said, if we did cn brackets in here, again, wrapping it in our function. Now you could leave it like this, but it's simpler to just put a comma, because inputs is literally just a list of anything that can be a class. So it can be a string. And then I'll also show you other things it can be using CLSX in a minute. But if we save that now, you'll see that we've still got that background yellow 600. But again, this is what we were going to be expecting. We want it to be using the class names we've passed the prop. But now what you'll see is if we inspect the HTML, it only has that background yellow 600. That background destructive is gone because it's intelligently merged it in a way that there's not going to be styling conflicts. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of that. The next part of that function that you saw in here is this CLSX part. Now this is really good for conditional classes. If I go to page.tsx, essentially what this is let's say I had some more props on here such as if I add an is warning prop, for example, and that's just going to be a Boolean, and then I get that prop from here, is warning. Now what I can do is I can come into this cn function here, and again, as I said, we can add another class name on top of this, where I'm going to define this as an object. I'm going to make this background yellow -200 this time, and then after here, I'm going to put is warning. Make sure we've got a comma on that. So what you'll see here is I've used an object where the key is background yellow 200. So the key is going to be the classes we want if this Boolean is true. We could also define this in another way. I prefer the object way, but you can also define it like so. So you can do a string with is warning and then the string that you want. It's background yellow 200. But as I said, I prefer it in this sort of object way because you can go ahead and add anything to this object. So you can make it a rounded button, for example, and various things like that. What I'll do in here as well is I'll just add font -bold if it's a warning. So now what this is, if we go up to our button here, we'll see it's missing the prop as I haven't made that a optional one. What we'll do is we'll add is warning and we'll just set that to true on here for now. So there you go. What you'll see is now that we've done that, it's conditionally applied that style when is warning is true. So we change this to false. You'd see it goes back to that and it's not using these styles and they won't appear on the HTML. So that's why we use that CN helper. It combines both of them for you. And it's really helpful when you're building out component libraries like this. Say if you wanted to make an alert component or something like that. And as I said, it helps with the one-off styling as well. If you just have to change it somewhere, but you don't want to create a whole new button or a whole new variant for it when you're only using it once. But on that note, the next thing we are going to look at is how you can use class variance authority to build out some variants on top of these components. To get started with class variance authority, first we're going to have to install that with our package manager. So for me, that's going to be pnpm I class-variance-authority, and we're going to install that. And the next thing we're going to want to do is I'm going to paste in a function here, and I'm just going to walk you guys through it. I'm going to make sure we're importing that CVA from class variance authority there. But essentially what we've got here is a function called button variance. And when we call this, what we're doing is we're doing CVA brackets. This first line here is going to be every tailwind item that we want to appear on this button by default. So anything that's not sort of in a variance, that's just going to be sort of your flex, just centering, maybe your rounded if your buttons are all going to have the same rounding. And again, sort of things like font, if they're all going to have the same font. And then after that, we're going to define an object. In the object, this is essentially the config for the variance. So we first define variance, and then next up, we've got an object called variant. This could be called anything. It could be called intent or anything like that. Just a name of a prop that it's going to take in and give you sort of different values for what you can also put in there. So for this, it's going to take in a variant, and that variant is either going to be default, destructive, outline, or secondary, based on, as I said, what you want that button to be. So if you want it to be sort of red for when it's a destructive action, or just an outline button, or in your secondary color if you've defined that. And then also we have a separate variant called size. So this is if you want to change your button sizes without them being tied to sort of the variance here. So you could have a destructive button of large size, small size default, and a default one of the same sizes, and they'll all be the same size. Lastly, outside of this variant, what we define is the default variant. So this is just if nothing's been passed through, use the default. And in my case, it's going to be a variant called default. So to use this, what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of what we've put down here. And all you're going to do is pass in that button variance function. And then you're going to call that with what you've sort of defined up here. So as I said, I've defined variant as the name for this. So we'll pass in variant. For now, I'm going to pass it in like this, just in the string. So I pass it in as there. And again, I'll pass in default here, like so. And then you can also put your comma class name if you would like to pass through those class name values. You're going to want to put it there as class variance authority will handle this for you, and then CN will take over the merging as well. So what this will do is it will apply the variant default styles for me. So it will apply that background primary, text primary, foreground. So as you see, it's changed down here. And it's also going to apply that default size. And then again, it's going to pass through any class names that we've given the button as one-off stylings. But this isn't really how you're going to want to use this sort of in the real world. You're going to want to add in your own variants and make sure these can be taken as a prop. So for that, what you're going to want to do is we can actually utilize, if you're using TypeScript, the type definition for it. So that's going to be, if we go down into our prop here, it extends React button HTML. We're going to just add something in here called and then it's going to be variant props. And then we're going to put type of button variants. We're going to make sure we need to import that stuff like so. And there we go. Get rid of that and there for a comma. Apologies. So now what we've said is it's going to be the button is going to take in the HTML or the React props that it can take in. Plus that is warning that we defined earlier that we can actually get rid of now, but I'm going to leave that there. And then also any variant props that we can pass through. What this allows us to do now is just go up to our button here and we can pass in the variant as, say, one of these. So we're going to pass it in as destructive. Now this isn't going to work because we need to go down here and make sure we're using these props. So within here, we're going to define variant, and with TypeScript it knows, and we're also going to define size. And using object shorthand, we can get rid of these two. And now we have a nice component set up that's reusable and comes with its own variants and size variants. As I said, to use this, all we need to do now is go up to our button, do button variant destructive. We could now add size, and then again, using TypeScript, it's going to know the ones that it can take in already. We could set that to large, and that'll be a big button now. So as I said, class variance authority is a really helpful way to just define your variants. You only have one component down here, and it just keeps it all clean that everything's up here and defined up here for your tailwind. So you don't have to pass through a load of props such as is warning. You could have a warning variant. It's a really useful way if you start getting a lot of different variants and a lot of different sizes that you use across your app. And again, you can use this button variants anywhere. So if you change something, you change it in one place and it changes everywhere for you. Lastly, we're going to look at some eslint feature to use that's going to really help you with your best practices. And I recommend it over the official Prettier plugin, and I'll explain why. The plugin that we're going to be using for eslint is eslint-plugin-tailwind CSS. So you're going to want to go and install this, and you can install that in your dev dependencies. But once you've got that installed, we're going to go need and make some changes to your eslint config. As I said, this is a bit of an advanced tutorial, so I'm going to expect you to have eslint set up already or know how to set this up. And we're just going to need to add a couple of things in here for ourselves. The first one being root, and you're going to want to set that to true. Need to make sure there's a comma there. And the next one is in your extends, which again, you may already have a load of rules in here or a load of things that it extends. I need to change this one up here. So with Next.js, it comes default with this Next Core Web Vitals ESLint plugin. But what we're going to do is we're going to turn this into an array, and we're going to go into here and we're going to add plugin shift dot, make sure that's in a string, plugin tailwind CSS / recommended. Like so. Save that. Now what we're going to do is you're also going to want to put it in your plugins if you have that array already. So that's going to be plugins here. And again, if you already have an array for that, you'd want to set that to tailwind CSS somewhere in there. And we're also going to need to now set up the rules for this. I recommend a couple of base ones here. So again, you may already have a load of different rule settings in here, but I recommend coming in here doing rules. And we're just going to change a few base ones. Now, you don't have to do this. It's going to be if it suits your need. I'll explain why I'm doing this to you. But the first one is going to be tailwind CSS / no-custom-class name. And I'm going to set that to off. What this rule is within the Tailwind CSS ESLint plugin, it will look for any class name that isn't a Tailwind class name and tell you off about it. So you could set this to warn if you're only using Tailwind and you don't want anyone to ever have a custom CSS class. You may as well leave this on and put it on error, because it will help maybe find a typo or something in your Tailwind class. Because if you have this off, it's not going to pick that up because it might think it's a different CSS class. The next thing I change is I do Tailwind CSS / class names - order. And you can essentially change this to warn or error for you. I'm going to change this to error, as I want the application to error out if my Tailwind isn't in order, so we can go ahead in there and fix that. Next, we're going to need to tell ESLint where we're looking for our Tailwind, and also tell it that it can look for Tailwind within that CN helper function that we defined earlier. So if I go ahead in here and define a settings object, We're also going to then, on top of that, need to define a Tailwind CSS object. We can add a new key called coolies, like so. And within that, it's just going to be an array that takes in our cn function name. And then also you're going to want to define a config key on there, like so. And that's going to take in tailwind.config.js. And that's just going to be the path to your Tailwind config. Now with that set up, we should start seeing some Tailwind errors. As you see, I've got 3 errors in here. It's moaning about a lot of things. So the first one is invalid Tailwind CSS class name order. Now, a reason there is actually a Tailwind CSS class name order, a really good thing about this is it essentially keeps it readable from component to component. So with this, it's going to put any custom classes at the front so you can see them. They're not lost within your Tailwind. And then it's also just going to have a sort of fixed order that you'll get used to seeing across your components. So it means you can go ahead into your components if you have loads of them, and you'll sort of get a picture for where things are going to be and where to look for things that aren't there. So we go ahead and fix those errors. I'm also going to show you another really cool one, which is we do say px1 and then py-1. If we go over here, we'll see that there's another error that says class names px1 and py1 could be replaced by p1. So that's a really sensible suggestion of why aren't you just using the simpler shorthand. And we'll go ahead and we'll fix all of those issues in there. So now it's also going to warn us about another one, which is the class names p-1 and p3 are conflicting. And again, all of these are quick fixable, so you can do them within VS Code or even within the command line. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that p3 one. Anyway, that is everything that I had for you guys to show you on that. Hopefully this has covered some key topics to help you master Tailwind in a more advanced way to use with your own sort of component libraries internally. I'll leave a link to all of the documentation that I've spoken about and covered below. If you have any more questions, please leave a comment. Thanks for watching.